Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Simplify life with diabetes. By the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin. And by Dexcom, keeping you in control with an integrated system for diabetes management.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, when you're thinking about new diabetes technology, sometimes your endo is right there with you, keeping up on the latest and greatest. But if they're not, a new resource could help. DiabetesWise Pro includes more than just pump and CGM specs.
And so we try to get, I think, a bit more of the person perspective and provider perspective before we hear exactly what the technical specifications are. Like you said, those are relatively easy to bake into a website. It's really, what do people think about it?
That's Dr. Corey Hood, the co-founder of DiabetesWise, a website that launched a few years ago to help consumers make more informed decisions around diabetes technology. We'll talk about why they launched this new pro effort, who it's for, and how it could change even the prescription process. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and you know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And I get a lot of endocrinologists and a lot of educators, a lot of healthcare people who listen to this show, but I also hear from a lot of consumers, a lot of patients and families who know maybe more about the very latest technology than their providers. You know, these are the folks, admittedly like me, who find out when something is FDA approved and immediately run to the portal to see if we can access it yet, or the folks in the DIY community who for years have had a hashtag and a motto, "We are not waiting." And when you think about it, you know, most endocrinologists see more patients than just those with diabetes. And like every healthcare provider, they're swamped with insurance and paperwork and nonsense. You know, and I know a lot of you, as you listen, you don't even see an endocrinologist, right? Your doctor who's helping you with diabetes might be a GP or an internist, something like that. All of that to say, it is great to see a tool like this that can help. I tell the story a lot when Benny got his insulin pump back in 2007. Our educator showed us I believe, 6 options back then, and I was completely overwhelmed. What do you put on a 2.5-year-old? I said, show me the one that works the best and is the most idiot-proof. And she laughed. We're so fortunate. Lynette has 2 now adult sons with type 1. So she'd been through it herself. She was really able to help me, but not everybody has a Lynette, right? Not everybody has somebody that can help them like that. DiabetesWise has been a terrific tool, and now DiabetesWise Pro is really interesting. So my guest this week is Dr. Corey Hood, a clinical health psychologist and professor of pediatrics and of psychiatry at Stanford University. He lives with type 1. He was diagnosed as a young adult, and he is the co-founder of DiabetesWise. This is a partnership from Stanford University School of Medicine and people living with diabetes. It is also supported by the Helmsley Trust. It's independent of industry, so no pump or CGM company is funding this. Corey and I first spoke about DiabetesWise in January of 2020. And we also spoke several years ago for an episode I called, "What's That Diabetes Device Doing to Your Brain?" All about the psychological effect of having to wear this stuff every day. It's a big mental load, and I will link up both of those episodes in the show notes. All right, DiabetesWise Pro in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And when it comes right down to it, there hasn't been a lot of innovation for insulin. Sure, there are different brands, but nothing really unique when it comes to insulin delivery, except for Afrezza. Afrezza is unique because it is the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin available. It starts working quickly without the need for injections at mealtime. Once you breathe Afrezza into your lungs using the inhaler, insulin appears in your bloodstream in less than 1 minute, and it may start reducing blood sugar in about 12 minutes. Find out more and see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease, such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on Afrezza.com/safety. Corey, thanks for joining me and welcome back. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on again.
Before we get started, can you just kind of tell us, for people who may not be familiar, what DiabetesWise is all about?
Yeah, sure. So the idea for DiabetesWise is really that we wanted to create something that people with diabetes could use to understand the whole landscape of diabetes devices. We feel like there's not enough out there that really offers a kind of unbiased view of what's available. So we wanted to create something that would help educate, would help kind of move people along in the journey of trying to get on diabetes devices, and then give them some extra tools along the way to kind of sustain that use. And so that's really the idea for DiabetesWise, and was created very much with the person with diabetes in mind. And then the professional version, I think as we did a little bit of work along the way, we heard a lot from people, and I know this clinically as well, but we heard a lot of people talk about how even if I want this, I can't get it. And so we wanted to create a way that would educate providers, healthcare providers that are working with people with diabetes, and then also give them some tools that make it a little bit more efficient to get their patients, their people with diabetes on these different devices. So that's really the professional version is an outgrowth of the patient version or the person with diabetes version. And we think that they can come together pretty nicely to educate and inform and give people a good resource for diabetes devices.
It's amazing to me we're so lucky to have an excellent endocrinologist and an excellent group where they seem to kind of not only know what's available, but they're able to tell patients and families kind of what's coming, and they help with insurance. And I mean, we're so lucky. But I've sent so many people, I'm so glad this is a resource. I've sent so many people in the last 2 years to DiabetesWise because it seems like their endocrinologists may not know, or they don't even see an endocrinologist.
And this is definitely built with a kind of an eye toward adults with diabetes, but we know that there are a lot of parents who use the resource as, a way to think about options for their kids. The reason I mention that is that we know in pediatrics, in kids with diabetes, that many of them have access to an endocrinologist. It's the majority of them. On the adult side, most don't have access to an endocrinologist. And so they're receiving diabetes care from family physician, primary care, in community clinics. And for that reason, there is a big gap with the ability of those providers who aren't trained specifically in diabetes to know everything that's available. When we were thinking about the professional version, we were also trying to be mindful of that fact that there are a lot of people that don't have kind of easy access. I mean, you were talking about your situation with your son, and I'm the same way. I have really easy access to everything I need to know about diabetes and my own diabetes care, but that's just not the case for most people.
I took a stroll through DiabetesWise Pro, which I hope is okay because I am hardly a pro or a provider by any means. But I was really curious what kind of questions they would have or what questions you were trying to answer. And one of the things I found absolutely fascinating was this little section on myth busting, right? And so this is where you're trying to tell doctors, hey, you might have heard this, not really the case. I don't know why I was surprised to see this, but I was. Tell me how this came about.
Well, I think that the way that you described it and how you kind of stumbled onto it is maybe the same way that we did as we talked with more and more providers. And the way that we thought about this project was we certainly wanted the endocrinologist or the specialist to be able to use this, but really it was built for the person, the provider with a lot less experience with diabetes. And so considering that, you have to interview and talk to a lot of different people. And so we talked to primary care, family physicians, like I mentioned before. We talked to a lot of CDCSs, especially those kind of out in the, maybe the rural clinics or community clinics. We talked to pharmacists. We talked to a number of different providers. We kept hearing some of these, what ended up being the myth busting section. We just kept hearing a lot of conversations about, well, this just isn't going to be available to my patient or the people that I see. This isn't going to be, if you get a denial, you need to move on. This isn't going to fit for this type of lifestyle. They're never going to approve this. There's just a lot that's out there that I think comes up partly because it is hard to get approvals or authorizations at times for different providers, but also you just it's a very busy clinical setting that many of them are working on. And if they don't have the time to kind of follow through on a lot of these different pieces. And so we wanted to have that section available to break down some of those myths.
One of the things that, and you mentioned this, but it kind of surprised me, was that some of the questions were about, technology is too difficult for my patient population. Like doctors kind of assuming, well, you're not really going to know how to use this, so why would I bother giving it to you? How do you get past that, which I assume is mostly well-meaning, right? A doctor doesn't want to give a patient something that they are worried they can't use safely, but also sounds really condescending.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's maybe a couple ways that I would answer this. And the first part is trying to come at this problem, and I'll say more about what I think the problem is, in a way that is trying to be helpful to the person the provider who's working with people with diabetes, and not be critical of them, or not to break them down in a way that they're not going to do it anymore. And so, because I think part of the problem is what you mentioned in your question is a bit of either, most of the time, unconscious bias about who's going to perform well on these different devices. And so I think that there's a couple things that go into that. There are data to tell us, I think, particularly in type 1, some data in type 2 as well, but I think specifically around people on insulin, when we think about the individuals who are achieving the targets for glycemic control, it is often more on the side of those in kind of the majority communities versus those on communities of color or minorities. What happens is that then there kind of forms this idea that maybe those individuals are going to be at higher risk for using these devices because they're already performing at a lower or below target. So it's risky to do that. And so I think that you start to kind of form these ideas, and then what happens is they just don't even give people an opportunity. And I think this is particularly true when communities of color are, and also from a resource perspective, poorer individuals aren't given these kind of resources. There are a lot of efforts, some from our group at Stanford and others, to try and break down some of these barriers, this unconscious bias, these kind of systemic ideas about who's going to do well. And so what we thought we could do was present it in a way that is thinking about what does a person have to do to be able to be on a device, and then what are going to be the potential benefits. We want to kind of lower what providers feel are risks at the same time that we're showing that there can be a lot of benefits. And that's much more in depth than what's in the myth busting section. But our efforts are aligned with, I think, our philosophy that everybody with diabetes should have access to these devices, and everybody should have the right to choose which devices are going to be best for them. And we know that that's not the case now, but we're trying to push it more closely to that.
So what's been the reaction to Diabetes Pro? Do you have people like me who are kind of sneaking over and checking it out? Have you heard from endocrinologists and doctors? I know you just rolled it out recently. Right back to Corey answering that question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. And I remember I spoke about this at the very beginning of the episode when Benny first started on the Animas insulin pump. That's the one we chose. An upgrade came out. We had to wait years to be eligible for it because of insurance requirements. How frustrating is that? I am so glad things are changing. For example, the Omnipod Promise takes those worries away. With the Omnipod Promise, you can upgrade to Omnipod 5 as soon as it's available to you and covered by insurance, all for no additional upfront cost. Omnipod is available through the pharmacy, which means you won't be tied to a long-term contract, and you're free to upgrade at any time. Not to mention, you can pick up your pods right where you pick up your insulin. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety, risk information, and Omnipod Promise terms and conditions, also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Now back to Dr. Corey Hood talking about the reaction to DiabetesWise Pros from the pros.
What's really interesting is that we launched it in April, and we're continuing to build a couple of sections, and I'll tell you about one of the efforts we're doing around the prescription tool. What we heard from a lot of providers actually before we launched the professional version was that they would just use DiabetesWise, the patient version, in just the similar way that they are now. There's really kind of three main components of the provider site. One is a device library where, as it sounds, you can kind of go through and compare different devices. You can look at it by priorities or preferences. You can look at it kind of the class of the device that it's in. We have a comparison feature, which was really popular on DiabetesWise, and I think is going to be really popular. We're hearing from professionals who are using it now that they like being able to say, hey, I want to compare this type of CGM to this type of CGM and see what the features are side by side. And then the other part of it is the prescription tool. This was, I think, the part that's probably been the hardest to build, but we think is going to have the most benefit to providers, because we know that there's a lot of providers that may be aware of these devices, but they don't know how to prescribe them. And it's not an easy process to prescribe anything related to a diabetes device. And so we're trying to build it in a way that makes it more efficient and makes it a little bit easier to kind of move through the process with these devices. What you see now is really picking a device, saying what kind of insurance they have, and then walking through the process of what are the next things you're going to have to do.
It is incredible to see all you've built. Can you talk a little bit about how you're able to do this? I mean, this is such a great joint project. It's Stanford Helmsley Trust, right? This is something that is not funded by industry.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad that you brought that up. So a couple things about DiabetesWise. When we conceived of it, we thought about, we need to keep this free. We need to keep this unbranded and unbiased in terms of what the best device is for somebody. We certainly have a bias. I have a bias that we need to get more people with diabetes access to devices and technologies. I think that you couldn't create something like this if you didn't have that bias that we need to get these into the hands of people because they're helpful. So we reached out to the Helmsley Charitable Trust, and they've been very generous with supporting this through their grant mechanisms to develop certain parts of it. So we were able to develop DiabetesWise. We were able to run a study with their funding to understand how people use it. We've done a lot of user research. Our partners, HealthMade and Upshift, and we've used a lot of different groups that know this space well. And then we went back to them when we thought about the professional version, and good collaborations with the team there and the program manager, Laurel Kester, and just a lot of really good ideas collectively of what to put into the provider version. We've done all of that work with their support. And like you mentioned, the Stanford side, it's housed at Stanford. And we've been really fortunate to be able to have Stanford elite, individuals, really knowledgeable individuals on technology, on endocrinology, on diabetes, on some of the issues we talked about in terms of systemic racism, bias, all these different features, and trying to kind of collect all of this together so that we can offer something that's really helpful to people and to all individuals with diabetes. So we've done it as a partnership collaboration, but the main point is that we're going to keep this free. We don't take money from device companies. We love them, but we don't take money from them for this resource.
You had mentioned building out a little bit more of the prescription or the insurance. Was it the prescription side? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So one of the features of the provider version, the professional version of DiabetesWise, is a prescription tool. It's a relatively straightforward kind of basic approach to using it, where you put in the device, you put in somebody's insurance, and then it's going to expand and tell you, these are the things you're going to need to get this approved. These are the typical documents that you need, the certificate of medical necessity, et cetera. What we're in the process of building right now is partnering with a company called Policy Reporter that has payer data and payer information. And so the prescription tool is going to evolve over these next few months to a place where you can put in, say you're in a visit with somebody, there's a patient sitting in front of you, and you can put in their exact insurance information, their plan, what state they live in, and it's going to be able to tell you if that device is approved for them, or is it approved, and what are the steps you need to take to get it approved. And so there's a lot of extra features that we're trying to build so that once you're done with this, sitting with the patient, or you're working on it later, you don't have to go back and fill in this information later. You can do it all right there. You can understand it. And then the person with diabetes also really understands what they're going to need to do. And so we're hopeful that this becomes a really helpful tool. I think one of the things on the myth busting side that we're going to have to reinforce is just this idea of if there is a denial or a rejection, that's not the end of it, to keep pushing forward. And I know that personally, going several rounds trying to figure out how to get something approved, whether it's a new insulin or a new device. So I think that we've got some more work to do on that side as well. But we're excited about where this prescription tool is going to be in the next couple of months.
When we spoke in 2020, and it was January 2020, so it was the real before times, it was also a time where it seemed like a lot was going to get approved in the next couple of months. And there were going to be more devices available and things were going to change, and obviously it's turned out a little differently. But more devices have been approved. It's not as though changing your website, I'm sure, is, oh my gosh, we've got to get on it today, breaking this, that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, though, how do you keep it all up to date when new devices are being approved? In other words, like when Omnipod 5 was approved earlier this year, how do you, and I don't mean just going in and typing the differences and putting the picture up, right? How do you then go ahead and try to compare it to what's there once it's released? Do you have testers? Do you all do your own research?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so there's a couple parts of it. One is we're fortunate to be in a place housed at Stanford and collaborate with Helmsley that have a pretty good sense of what's coming or what is about to be available. And so just by our exposure to kind of the people that are part of this, we know what's coming. We don't always know exactly when, but we know. And so we can prepare somewhat for those things as they're developing. There's kind of the informal side where we're talking with individuals with diabetes about what their expectations are, what they think is going to happen with a certain device. Are they excited about it? We also find the actual users, maybe even from some of the studies, and ask them questions about, what were the things that they liked about it, what didn't. And so we try to get, I think, a bit more of the person perspective and provider perspective before we hear exactly what the technical specifications are. Like you said, those are relatively easy to bake into a website. It's really, what do people think about it? An example would be like with the Omnipod 5 that's out, we would want to ask people about in terms of, their kind of priorities for using. What would make someone want to use something like this? And it'll align with other potentially closed loop systems. But we want to have some rankings that go into how we make recommendations for these different based on responses that people give. And so we try and keep up with that. And we have to stay current. I think that more than not, we have people on our team that have type 1 diabetes. And so there's a lot of kind of vested interest in understanding what's available and potentially moving forward with these different things. Part of your question was noting we had some work to do during the pandemic, still trying to get devices to people. We were running a study actively with DiabetesWise at the time. But one of the other things we did was we did a series of interviews with different companies, different leaders in the space, and talking about some specific ways that people can access devices in a very different setting than what it was like 6 months prior to that. And so we tried to also stay current with the kind of changing landscape of the way that people access care and access these different devices. And I think with a professional version, you're going to see that as a pretty important part, because one of the things that is happening, as you I'm sure are aware, and I know you've had different conversations with industry leaders and they've been on your program, the movement from durable medical equipment to pharmacy benefits and trying to understand if someone actually wants to get something, where they can actually access it. That's probably been our hardest part to keep track of, is once someone wants something, how they can actually get it and who they have to get it through, depending on the hundreds of different potential payers and plans that are available.
Just to be clear, Corey, you mentioned kind of during the pandemic and how things have changed the way people talk to their doctors. You meant telehealth, right? That's kind of what you were alluding to? Okay.
Yeah, we saw, a huge shift in that. And you see, and a lot of it has stayed. And I think that it's helped a number of different parts. I think what I'd like to see a little bit more of, and hopefully DiabetesWise can be a part of this, is thinking about both the use of telehealth, so remotely connecting with the person, but at the same time being able to remotely connect around all the data that's available from the different devices. And I think that that's a little bit of a trickier piece, but I think that that's going to be something that's really going to make, I think, a big difference if providers looking at a screen and they see the person on one side of it and see the data on the other side. I mean, that's a much different kind of interaction. And if you can do that remotely and connect with people that way, I think it could make a big difference.
You live with type 1. You've had type 1 for more than 20 years. You were diagnosed as a young adult. We've talked before in a different episode about kind of the psychological toll wearing these devices takes on people and how, you kind of don't think about that, but it's there. As you've worked on DiabetesWise, I'm not asking you to get too philosophical here, but I'm curious, like as a person with diabetes, when you see a resource like this, do you find yourself thinking about how it impacts you in your daily life?
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you asking that. And I think that, I guess I would answer it in, as I mentioned, I'm a big proponent of using devices. I think that they're a really great tool to kind of help the daily management, the daily grind of diabetes. But I also know that my experience is different from many others. And, it may not be the case that everybody finds that same benefit. Part of, I think, what happens with DiabetesWise and building some of the professional side of it is it grounds me, hopefully. It kind of pulls me back to say, okay, even if I think that this is going to be the best, this device or this technology is the best for somebody, it may not work best for them. And so let's think about and be creative with other ways and what are other aspects of education and support that we can provide that are also really necessary. And one of the things that we've been trying to build out a bit more on the provider side, on DiabetesWise, I think we have a really useful resource with, a wisdom section. And we've heard from a lot of different people that they like this section because it's stories from people of some being reluctant to try a device, but then getting on it and having some success with it. Others saying, I tried the most advanced pieces of equipment. I didn't like it. And now I'm using this and it works really well for me. I think that we need to do a bit more for the providers and understanding kind of the psychological toll of some of those individuals and how it can really wear them down. And so I know this question was supposed to be about me, but but my answer has been a lot about, I think, what I've taken from hearing stories of others and learning a bit more is to have maybe a bit more kind of rounded view of what's going to be available to people and what's actually going to work for them. I'm really fortunate to be able to do a lot of the things I want to do, with diabetes. And I've found the systems that work best for me. I'm excited about a lot of the new developments and I'll want to try all of them. I feel very fortunate to be in a position that I'm in, around diabetes and access to both the devices, technology, care, and just the knowledge of so many people in the field.
Before I let you go, I have to let you know that I actually mentioned DiabetesWise and used it as a resource this feels kind of self-promoting, but I want to tell you while I've got you, in my new book. So Still the World's Worst Diabetes Mom comes out this fall. And I have a chapter about choosing technology. And I like DiabetesWise a lot. And I hope I'm not biased by doing this interview talking about it, but I put it in the book because I think it's such a great resource. So I'm really glad to have a chance to talk to you again and to kind of thank you for doing it. And we'll link up, of course, all the resources. And we do have a lot of healthcare professionals who listen, so they can be linked up as well to the professional side of it.
Oh, that's great to hear. And I just recently ordered your book so that it arrives in time. And, I was thinking about it and kind of reading the blurb about it. I think this is going to be a really helpful resource, as obviously for parents, but also I think that one of the things that we do a lot of for working with pediatric families, sometimes it's about, we do a lot of work with parents around feeling guilty, ashamed, or embarrassed about different things. And so I think some of the anecdotes and stories and different parts of it are going to be really, can be really helpful just for parents to know that they're not alone in some of the things that happen. And so I appreciate you adding DiabetesWise, but I think that we're excited that this is going to be an available resource for people.
Wow. Well, that was a nice unplanned pat on the back for both of us. I really appreciate it. Corey, thank you so much. Keep us posted. And as those updates come in too, if there's anything you want to add, I'm more than happy to, let my audience know. But thanks for making the time and coming back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been really great, and look forward to coming back again and talking about whatever we're doing next.
Sounds great.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Lots more information about this episode, including how to find DiabetesWise, over at the episode homepage, and that is always at diabetes-connections.com. Show notes are wherever you listen if you're listening on a podcast app, but if you can't access it, head on over to the homepage. Some apps are a little more fussy than others. I got something to tell you. It's mostly for moms. So if you are a mom of a child with diabetes, or you know one, stick around. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And when we first started with Dexcom back in December of 2013, the share and follow apps were not an option. They hadn't come out with the technology yet. So trust me when I say using share and follow apps makes a big difference. I think it's really important to talk to the person you're following or sharing with and get comfortable with how you want everyone to use the system. Even if you're following your young child, these are great conversations to have. At what number will you text? How long are you going to wait to call? That sort of thing. And that way the whole system gives everybody real peace of mind. And what I love about Dexcom Share is helping Benny with any BG issues using the data from the whole day and night and not just one moment. Internet connectivity is required to access separate Dexcom Follow app. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Speaking of Dexcom stuff, I did get a couple of people asking me about Benny at camp. And if you are new, my son is away at regular sleepaway camp this summer. He goes all the time. He's gone every year for a month since he was 9, not super little. But he is there for 8 weeks this summer. And we agreed, again, using share and follow the way you want to use them for yourself. We agreed I wouldn't follow this summer. He's got people at camp following him, people that he selected. So it's hard for me, right? It's hard as a mom to let your kid go like that. But he's been doing really well as you're listening. I think he's going to be 6 weeks in at this point. So my goodness, I'm sure he'll give us a full report when he comes home. Those episodes are fun, I think, for him. I'm always a little worried about what he's going to say. But I mentioned moms, and I want to tell you about an event I'm doing. It's going to be here in Charlotte, North Carolina in January. I'm calling it Diabetes Connections Presents Mom's Night Out. I want to give the moms of kids with diabetes a break, some time for ourselves, some time to socialize and connect and meet other moms and learn about technology. We're going to have lots more to come. There's going to be a link in the show notes. I'd really like you to click on that and at least save the date. It is January 20th and 21st. If you sign up now, there's no obligation. You're signing up to get emails from me about this event. And I urge you to do so because we are limiting the number of people who can attend. And I got a lot of interest in this. When I went to Friends for Life, there were people in Florida saying, we want to drive up for it, which is great. So it's going to be regional. That was always the plan, North and South Carolina. Maybe some folks from Atlanta, people from Virginia. So I think if you're in just a couple of hours drive, you could make it a weekend. It's definitely an overnight. We have hotel registration coming. It's going to be great. I'm so excited about this. So there's a link, as I said, in the show notes on the episode homepage, but you can also go to diabetes-connections.com, click on events. Got a new tab. We've added events. So far, this is the only one, but I would really like to expand this. And I got to tell you guys, if this goes well, I want to do it in more cities. Fingers crossed, but I think this could be a lot of fun. And I know that moms are looking for connection because I am one. And I know we need each other. All right, our newscast episodes are back. We're on our regular schedule now. Episode 500 is coming up. Watch for more announcements about that on social media. Oh my goodness, I need your help. We're going to do this together. We're going to do a live episode 500. But for now, thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you, as always, for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.